Defender Nation, it is good to be with you, albeit virtually, but it is still good. And I know the question that you're all probably asking as you watch this is, have I been in quarantine 6 months longer than everyone else? No, I just look like this. My beard it needs a little bit of a trim right now, but that's okay. But just excited to be with you. And I want to start with a question. I want to ask you, what do you really need from God right now? What blessing do you want from Him? And I want you to think about it. I want you to reflect and answer that question, because I think right now in this moment, we have needs in this moment in history, and the way that this pandemic is impacting our world and our lives, we have needs. That oftentimes God releases His blessing on us after a season or moment of hardship or testing or wrestling. And so with that in mind, I want to look at the character of Jacob in the Old Testament, specifically in Genesis chapter 32. And so we know about Jacob, right? He's the son of Isaac, who's the son of Abraham, and he had a twin named Esau. And if you remember, as he was born, he was holding on to his brother's heel. He wanted to be the firstborn. He wanted the birthright. And he ended up getting it because he took the birthright, right? He deceived his father. His name means he cheats. He deceived his father. Later in life, he deceived his uncle Laban and tricked him into giving him more sheep in a flock than he deserved and than he had. And most of Jacob's life, the blessing that he received was through deceit and was through trickery. But in Genesis 32, we have this moment, we have this scene where he's with his family and a small tribe, and he's traveling back home. But his brother Esau is pursuing after him with 400 men seeking to kill him. And Jacob is scared, he is afraid, he has worry, and he's anxious, and he's desperate. And so he can't sleep, so he goes and finds a place to pray. And here's part of his prayer, Genesis 32, verse 9. He says, "O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant." He's at a low point. He doesn't feel worthy of God's love. He doesn't feel worthy of God's blessings that he has promised to him and to his fathers, and he is low. But then we get this scene where a man appears, and it's actually God. God appears, and Jacob and God begin to wrestle each other. Just think, wrestling God. It surprises me every time I think about this text of what would it actually look like to physically wrestle God. And so God touches the hip of Jacob, and it becomes out of joint. He gets hurt. There is pain. And then God says, we need to stop. It's time to be done. But Jacob looks at God, I'm assuming, and says, no, I will not stop until you bless me. So what does God do? He blesses Jacob. He changes his name to Israel. And at the end of the scene, we have these words from Jacob in verse 30. "For I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been delivered." Again, I'm surprised every time in this text about wrestling God. And we see how Jacob moves from fear and anxiety at the beginning of the night, and he moves to hope and blessing and restoration at the end. And I kind of think that's the season God has us in, you and me, and our world in right now. And so I want to draw 3 quick principles from this text that I think can apply to our life. Here's the first one. God initiates the wrestling. In Jacob's story, God pursued Jacob. If we look at Jacob's prayer, he felt no good. He felt unworthy. He didn't think he deserved any love or any affection from God. And what did God do? He met him where he was at. So in your moment right now, God will meet you where you are at, in your fear and in your anxiety and worry and doubt. So God initiates the wrestling. Here's the second one, is God is pleased by the wrestling. God is pleased by the wrestling. Jacob was bold. And honestly, probably more bold, he was actually desperate, right? He came to the end of himself. He realized he could not do it anymore. He couldn't do it on his own. He needed God. God told him to stop, and he said, "No way, bless me." I think we need a little more desperation in our relationship with God. And often the moments of hardship and struggle and wrestling bring us to a place where we recognize our desperate need for Jesus. And it's in those moments where we cry out bold requests and honest cries. And here's the last one, is God transforms through the wrestling. Right? Jacob's name was changed to Israel. And anytime in Scripture we see a name change, it's a symbol of restoration. It's a symbol of transformation and renewal. And Jacob at the end of this says, "For I have seen God face to face, and I have lived. As a result of my test and my wrestling, I know God more. I have a better relationship with him. I see him more clearly." Defender Nation, I'm not sure when COVID-19 will end or when this pandemic will slow down. I'm not sure what exactly is in your financial future or what job security you have, but here is what I know. On the other side of this is God's blessing. On the other side of this is God's renewal and transformation to bring us into closer relationship and proximity to him, to conform us to the image of his son, Jesus. And so my prayer for us is that we will look more like Jesus at the end of this, that we will wrestle. And by the way, if you look at Jacob's life, what came from his wrestling was 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel. Great kings came from them, and the greatest king, the King of Kings, came from him, Jesus. That was the blessing he received, and I cannot wait to hear the ways God blesses you and the stories we get to hear when you're back on campus or that you email us. And so know that I am praying God's blessing over you and God's transformation and his renewal. So keep wrestling, keep crying out, and be transformed.